Hi, I'm Dr. Mollie Marti, and welcome to Resiliency Matters. Today we are speaking with Sarah Streyder, a proud military spouse, the founding director of a nonprofit, Secure Family Initiative, and Worldmaker's 2023 Promise Leader recipient. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks, Molly. Good to see you.
Good to see you, and congratulations. We're going to talk about the award. The first place I want to start is we're in very different time zones. I'm in Iowa. Where are you and why?
I am in South Korea, about an hour outside of Seoul, and I just got here a few weeks ago because I'm the spouse of someone who is active duty military, and we're stationed out here because we're Space Force, and Space Force is taking over a mission the Army's been doing out here for a while. So just part of the military spouse life. You never know where I'm going to be tuning in from.
And you really have helped me better understand and appreciate the life of a military spouse and a military family. And I'm not alone in benefiting from your guidance. You actually were the 2022 AFI Military Spouse of the Year. And I'm curious, what does that mean to you to be a leader for other military spouses?
It's a lot of pressure, that's for sure. But I think what's cool is that we get to, each generation of military spouse gets to define what it means to be a military spouse. So the experience might be very common, where a community that undergoes what I would call a steady, constant stream of challenges that are sometimes then punctuated by more acute crises. So a lot of us, especially if you're in an active duty status, we move houses and communities every 1 to 4 years. And there's this constant risk that our military's operational tempo at any given moment, given current events, might spike, and that has immediate implications for your loved one who could be sent into harm's way. And our community also includes caregivers and survivors whose families have already been permanently changed by violence out of their control. So it's just such a unique lifestyle. And being a leader in this kind of community does not mean fitting a certain mold or doing a certain to-do list. I think it means being your authentic self and demonstrating all of the different ways that being a military spouse can look like. You know, I have folks in my cohort from 2022 who have different family compositions than me, who worship differently than me, who look differently than me. And all of us get to be different, authentic, diverse leaders that just show to the world, like, hey, don't put us in a box. We are all unique humans. Interact with us on a personal basis, please.
Exactly. The term military spouse, to me, it feels that your identity in some ways is dependent on your status, military family, and your spouse, right? You're being defined by that. And I'm really curious if you have grappled with that or if you've seen others. And what have you found helpful in that area of that self-identity?
Oh, Molly, it is a journey. I just, to speak personally, I remember when I first you get an identification card that says, yes, as a dependent to my spouse, I can go on base, I can access services, that kind of thing. Dependent. It's right there on your identity card. And I had a really hard time with that word when when my spouse first enlisted and we got started. I was like, I don't like that. I don't identify as dependent. All of my like feminists, I don't need no man. No, all of that kind of culture was just grating against what felt like this really antiquated setup. But it is, yeah, it's weird and it's hard. Being a military spouse is like this institutionalized identity in a way that's unique to being the spouse of a firefighter, the spouse of a preacher. Also lives that are tricky, but they're just not, it's just distinct. But what I found over time is, I used to keep these parts of my life very distinct. There was Sarah doing her work in Washington, D.C., and there was her military partner stationed in Nebraska. We were geographically separate, we were culturally separate. And over time, it was actually when I joined him in Nebraska and I got involved in some advocacy work at the state level where I realized, wait a second, my connection to the military actually adds value to whatever analysis that I'm bringing to this policy because I have a unique stake in the issues I'm talking about. And that's where things started to shift for me, where I realized I can actually make this work for me, where when I meld all of the different parts of myself, it can actually amplify the power and influence that I have. So it was like taking my power back when it felt like before then it had been an identity trying to take my power away.
I love it, taking your power back and a process of integration. And you had started, with the conversation on authenticity, right? That's the journey. So you mentioned, valuing some pieces. What do you value the most about being a part of the military community, being a military spouse?
Get to meet so many different cool people. Like just yesterday, I'll give you a very fresh example. I'm here in South Korea. The only person I know is my spouse, and within like a 5 mile radius at least. And it can be really lonely, but I finally was like, you know what? I want to go on base. I want to go to the gym. I want to go to a Pilates class. I gave birth a little over a year ago. I want to start regaining that core strength that I've been neglecting. And I meet the Pilates instructor who's another military spouse, and she's just like the coolest human, and we start vibing, and that's probably someone I would not have run into were it not for this unique life that threw us together, because we're originally from very different parts of the US. We would have had very different career trajectories. I think being a military family member, spouse, parent, kid, whatever, you just get exposed to a uniquely diverse and representative slice of the United States. And then, of course, if you're lucky enough to get stationed overseas, of the world. And that's the part of the experience that I wouldn't trade for anything.
So cool. And those relationships are the number one factor building resilience. We talked a bit about that, but that diversity is what adds the flavor to life as well. So that's really a tremendous value of your path, your life path. So you and I met earlier this year as fellow scholars at the George W. Bush Veteran Leadership Program. And we were exposed to some tremendous leaders along the way. And I'm wondering, what are some key leadership lessons or principles, or maybe you're still, playing around with them, but what are some key takeaways that you're kind of carrying in your head or your heart these days?
So many, but the one I'll list top of mind is one of my small group mates, Selena Martin, is just a tremendous leader in her own kind of segment of the space, and has truly become a mentor to me. Who at one point when we were having a small group discussion talked about leaders needing to listen to what they're not, or excuse me, to listen to what's not being said. And it really resonated with me because I'm a direct communicator. I'm also, I think the phrase is a low context communicator. So if what you're trying to tell me is not in the text of what you're telling me, 70% of a chance I'm going to miss it. And what I realized at that time is one of my leadership challenges in my organization is that I was just not really connected. I could tell that one of my staffers, there was more there that I just wasn't understanding. And so I did a good job of trying to follow Selena's guidance and pause and think, okay, I'm focusing on what I'm being told, but I need to also listen for what's not being said, but that's still kind of there, and digging into that. And sure enough, after our mod, I went back to my organization, I went back to my work life, and I kind of dug into it, and we unearthed this whole new area of, both a bit of resolution that need to happen, but then a whole new project kind of came from it. And so that's one of the little, probably a toss away nugget that Selena just kind of mentioned casually in a small group discussion that had this huge consequence for my organization back home. And I think that's just an example of a lot of these conversations we had on bus rides, around the table, around the water cooler, proverbially, that just stuck with me. I mean, I could speak of a few that we had, Molly, as well, but yeah, I came away with friends and mentors, and I think it's just priceless. What about you? What's been your main takeaway?
Yeah, well, that's priceless because that came from another conversation I hadn't heard of. So already I'm like, man, I am taking that into my life as well. What's not being said, and look for that. What has stayed with me is one of my North Stars, and I shared this toward the end of the journey, as it was, is that conversation around power, and really recognizing that we all have, at least all those people sitting in that room had a tremendous amount of privilege and power. And so those questions of, am I owning my power? And am I wielding it? And that word, from one of the speakers, am I wielding it with wisdom and humility? And then am I using it effectively to help as many people as possible? And if you remember, that was a whole conversation about strategic partnerships. And that's really where I challenged myself to amp up my game on being strategic. You know, I'm always very collaborative and play well in the sandbox, and all of those things is how I'm wired. But to be much more strategic in working to help more people and amplify our mission and our work. So that's still sitting near the top for me.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's a good one. That's not something you just check the box. Okay, I understand this concept holistically now. It has to circle back over and over. Definitely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the scholars range from age 30, you, to into their 60s, not quite me, but toward that end. And despite you being the youngest scholar by far, Sarah, you matched every scholar with what you brought, you know, your dedication, your wisdom, your contribution. And so, and this is probably a good place to note that you hold a master's degree in public policy from Cambridge University with a focus on international human rights. And so for many, many reasons, you so inspired me that I came back, and it was during the nomination process for our annual Worldmaker Awards. And I threw your name into the hat for our hope, or our promise leader. And I'm so thrilled that you were selected. So I want to read what this award is and why. It's presented to an influencer under the age of 40, dedicated to creating solutions for today's interconnected and dynamic world, contributing to a narrative of human thriving. So again, congratulations. And let's wrap up this segment just exploring, what does that narrative of human thriving in our interconnected world mean to you?
Well, thank you first and foremost for this honor. It's really humbling, and I just am just very privileged to be joining a cohort that has such a really cool legacy. We might get into this after the break too, but I really focus on this word. So thriving, resilience, all of these are words that sometimes we interpret as meaning you have to kind of push through anything that comes up against you. You have to kind of deal with it, live with it, and get over it. What I want to do is kind of reshape maybe thriving, and maybe resilience in particular actually means speaking up when we're asked to put up with things that we shouldn't have to put up with in the first place. And what we do at SFI when we talk about advocacy is actually raising our head above the day-to-day challenges and saying, wait a second, there's a problem with how this is happening. And I want to, by speaking up about it, not only make it such that me and my individual family might not have to deal with things that we shouldn't have to deal with in the first place, but I can also make a change such that future generations and those who don't have as much of a voice or as confident a footing, that they too might be able to thrive and be resilient only on the things that are like unavoidable kinds of challenges. And so that's been our focus, my focus in my personal work. And then what I've kind of infused the organization I started with is, where can we look to improve human thriving by saying, wait a second, we don't have to deal with this anymore.
Looking for a better way forward for ourselves and for future generations.
And for others.
And that is why you are our hope builder. So we will talk more about this and about advocacy, which you just brought up. So stay tuned, and we will be back.
Today, more than ever, you need fast, reliable internet. At Mediacom, we want you to know you can count on us. Our fiber-powered 100% gigabit technology network was built for the future. We have enormous capacity and power, and 99.99% network reliability. So even though these are uncertain times, we're prepared, and you can be certain we'll keep your world connected.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to that.
Our back and forth. It always came back. Dad! You probably don't remember what you told me,
That was perfect.
but I heard every word.
If I could go back and change it all, I would.
I think I'm gonna miss you the most. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Or maybe it's just the little moments. If I could go back and change it all, if I could go back, I would. But I can't.
Welcome back to Resiliency Matters. We are speaking with Sarah Streyder, a proud military spouse and nonprofit executive. Sarah, you founded and direct the nonprofit Secure Families Initiative, which we might call SFI. What is your mission and your work at SFI?
Basically, we want to help military partners and loved ones, so anyone who's connected to someone actively serving in uniform, get more involved in voting and advocacy on big issues that impact all of us. We kind of have carved out for ourselves issue areas like foreign policy, which obviously have huge impacts for our well-being that we want to get more involved in. Democracy and voting is another big issue that impacts a lot of us, especially if you're stationed halfway around the world from where you vote. But we also just give a lot of the raw tools of voting and civics that individuals get to take and own into whatever issue areas they care most about. That's our mission.
Excellent. And we've just touched upon advocacy, which I think can be an intimidating concept for some people. Yeah, it feels big, especially for those who fear that if they speak out, it might hurt or jeopardize, their career path or their partners, or just some fear around it. So talk about how you see advocacy. Break that down for us.
Yeah. And what's required to be an advocate? Not a master's degree from Cambridge University. Let me just say that. I know you mentioned that credential earlier, Molly, but if you're connected, if you love someone in uniform, you have lived experience that is itself expertise that decision makers who shape our country's foreign policy and national security need to have in order to make the most informed, data-driven decisions possible. And so being an advocate does not require that you have a fancy degree or have spent thousands of hours learning the right vocabulary for that field. It means having a genuine and authentic connection to the thing that you're talking about. Advocacy in its core is storytelling. It's telling your true lived experience story to whoever a relevant decision maker is, who might be the fancy lawmaker. It might be your local neighbor who votes for that fancy lawmaker. Both of them are themselves decision makers, someone who has influence over whatever it is that's part of your life that you're trying to change. And it's essentially persuading them through your story that it's in their self-interest to make whatever the changes that you're doing. That's it. And you don't need, again, a fancy 5-syllable word vocabulary in order to do that. In fact, you probably are going to be less impactful convincing that next door neighbor to join your cause if you wheeled around your SAT terms. So the most successful advocacy that I've seen comes from diverse, authentic, and persistent voices. So you want to find other people who may look, sound, or worship differently from you, but who all have directly been impacted by whatever it is you're focused on. And you speak up together about this issue over and over and over again. You cannot take your first no as the forever no, because it takes time to change, to not only raise awareness of an issue, but then also to persuade folks that it's important enough to make a change. So kind of gathering people power, gathering your own personal storytelling power, and then identifying, okay, who do I need to make this change? Who are my decision makers? And they may look, wider and more differently than we traditionally think. And then not giving up and not leaving those people alone. That is like 85-90% of the battle when it comes to advocacy. So hopefully that makes it feel more accessible.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And I know sitting around some of those tables where there's a lot of alphabet soup behind people's names, we never have enough people with the lived experience, right? Sometimes I get in those rooms and I'm like, where are the people with the lived experience that we're trying to help move the needle for? So I think that's such an important point that, we are all experts in our life. We're experts in our experience, and we're experts in issues and people that we care about. So what tips do you have? Because I think that would really resonate with our listeners, not just military families, but everyone, whether you're advocating for your child at school or advocating in a community or beyond. What are some additional tips you could give to someone listening to go, I haven't thought of advocacy like that. And that is something, that there's something I care about and I want to start moving forward. You've touched upon some, like it's easier in numbers and instead of going out by yourself, but what additional tips?
Yeah, I love the variety of examples you gave, Molly, because it reminds me of a story. So we did a fly-in where we brought military partners from all over the country. We flew them to DC to meet with members of Congress and the White House to talk about US-China relations. That sounds pretty scary, right? Like pretty intimidating, pretty big deal. And it was a big deal in like the best of ways. We had one meeting where, let's just say the staffer on the Hill that we were meeting with, not as resonant with what we were trying to push for. So it ended up starting off as a bit more contentious. But one of my fellows kind of came, when she was processing the experience afterwards, she's like, as soon as I realized I've done this before, my child has special needs, and I've had to advocate over and over again for my child, to the teacher, to the principal, to the school board member, that my child deserves the plan, whatever it's called, IEP, right? The individual education plan. Here are the standards, we need to stick to them. As soon as I realized that this person across the desk might look fancy, but is just another school teacher, principal, school board member that I'm very accustomed to speaking to, my whole demeanor shifted and I regained my power and I pushed through the rest of the meeting. I just loved that kind of shift in her mind. And so that's my biggest tip is think about something that you do every day where you do wield your power, maybe on a smaller scale, and apply that same confidence and those same skills, even if it escalates and it gets fancier. And you asked earlier, Molly, too, about the fear factor, and I forgot to touch on it, but it's not a thing. If you're a military spouse, you've been told over and over again, shh, sit down and be quiet. If you speak up and stand up, it's going to get your service member in trouble. And I don't know how else to say that's not true other than just being like, look at us. Like there's so many of us out there. Like part of what gave me the confidence to get more and more bold, more and more outspoken, for gosh sakes, I've been on CNN half a dozen times now, speaking truth to power now. And it's just by doing it over and over again that I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop and it just doesn't. So, and I'm not alone, right? I have a whole network now of peers who have also been similarly bold and courageous, and we get to be a support network for each other. So I guess if you're someone in the audience who has that fear, reach out and let's talk it out, because my guess is the fear is bigger than it has to be.
Well, and I think again, it's that military spouse and the identity, but some of that shush up and sit down also is historically military spouses are women. And so not to open a Pandora's box there, but that comes up to mind. And also SFI, you have resources at your website where people can start to build. It's a skill we're talking about, right? So build that skill.
Yep, you go from the story of me to the story of them to the story of us. That's a little like teaser of how it's so easy. We promise we'll help you do it.
Excellent. And speaking of the SFI website, one key area of advocacy is to expand the military vote and defend democracy. That's one I really want to make sure we touch upon. So talk about that, what SFI is doing in that area and why it matters.
I was gonna say, can I start by talking about why I think voting matters? And it is
Absolutely.
not some cheesy every vote counts. I'm not even gonna pretend to convince you that when you cast your ballot every time that it's gonna make a numeric difference in the outcome of every election, okay? I mean, sometimes it does, but we could probably count those instances on one hand. No. The reason voting matters is not what happens November of 2024. It's what enables you to do in January of 2025. And what do I mean? Every time you cast a ballot and you vote, there is a permanent record, not of how you voted, but that someone who looked like you and your profile, your demographics, all of that participated. And what that means is that anytime a lawmaker starts to look at the type of constituent that they're going to need to win over next time they're going for re-election, or anytime someone's considering running for office, for example, they're going to be looking at the profile of who is most likely to vote and prioritizing the issues that those demographics care about and the methods of communication those demographics relate more to. So for me, for example, I'm on the younger end, as you outed me earlier, Molly. Every time I vote, I make the district in which I vote look younger and, in my case, more female, than it would were I not to vote. I permanently, every single time, skew the demographics in my favor, which means that candidates are going to talk about issues that relate more to me and my family stage and what I care about than were I not to vote. And so if I show up in January of 2025, I knock on the door of a member of Congress and I say, I really want you to care about this policy of investing in military childcare facilities. They are way more likely to say, yes, this is something I'm going to prioritize if their voting base, again, if the people who showed up at the polls, who they are responsible for, are on this kind of younger family end, or maybe have a military connection, or 92% of us are women. If you think of issues that are often related with that voting block, right? They're going to listen to me if I voted, whether or not they're the person they voted for. So if that's why voting matters in a way that might be different from how we think about it, and I care about my military families having success when they knock on that door of a member of Congress, I need to make sure my military families are getting out the vote. Unfortunately, we've not been doing that historically. In 2020, there was a 27% voter participation gap between military voters and civilian counterparts, even when you controlled for those demographic differences. And so what we've been doing is analyzing the logistical barriers that we can fix through policy change. And we've been improving our outreach to folks to remind them of when to register, how to register, all that stuff that duty tries to do, but often focuses on the active duty member. We try and expand that to family members.
That is really interesting. And it's a different way for me to view it. And I really thought you would go the democracy. Just talk a bit about that piece and protecting 100%. Our American democracy.
Yeah, after January 6th, 2021, I think it took a lot of us aback where we thought, wait a second, the democratic institutions that our military service is in part protecting has come under a new attack that's a little bit closer to home. And it's something that we wanted to take responsibility for trying to fix. And so, you know, part of what we do in terms of democracy, we defend voting access. We make sure, you know, a democracy can only thrive if everyone gets a chance to have their voices heard. But we also look at elections and staving away misinformation that can cast a lot more doubt on election integrity than it deserves. By promoting civic participation, we're hoping that this serves as an antidote to more violent means of political activism, because we want to make sure that the peaceful democratic ones are accessible to those who need it and reactive to those. So that's our theory of change regarding democracy, Mollie.
Excellent. Sarah, thank you so much for serving as a role model for military spouses and for women present and future, for working toward those future solutions. You are a promise leader, and it is my honor to know you. So thank you for this conversation.
Thank you, Mollie, and to the whole organization. It means a lot.
And thank you, viewers, for joining us on MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.